Warmly welcome to this seminar, this Fireshed seminar here at Teknikringen 1. I think we all are very interested in the theme of today. We only missed the fire, I think, right? So the theme of today is unveiling paths to decolonialization, rethinking perspectives and embracing diversity. And we are very happy to have here on site Caroline Wamala Larsson, Associate Professor in Gender Studies and also the Director of SPIDER, which is a center at Stockholm University, which has a focus on inclusive digitalization. Also, we have online. Hi, do you see us and hear us? Well, Joanne? Great. So we have Joanne Betancourt, and he's at present in Colombia, but are participating here online with us today. And he is a researcher and at Stockholm Institute of Center for Latin America, and he focuses on gender analysis and environmental issues. And I'm really looking forward to listen to what both Caroline and Joanne has to tell us about this very important and interesting theme, and a theme that I suspect many of us has some kind of idea what it can mean, but today we will also have the chance to get a closer and more in-depth understanding. And I know that Caroline and Joanne, they also want you to be interactive and ask questions, so I will support that when Joanne and Caroline have their seminars or presentations. So prepare and think about questions to ask afterwards. With that, I'm leaving the floor to you, Caroline.
Is my mic on? Oh, brilliant. Thank you. It's really great to see so many of you. When I was trying to make my way here, I thought, oh, there'll probably be 2 of us or something. So it's great to see so many people in the audience, and of course to have my colleague Juan online to share this fireside chat. As Susanne also mentioned, we're just missing the fire, but I think it's warm enough in the room. When I was asked to speak to this topic of decolonization, I thought, oh my goodness, where does one start? And I thought, okay, how about I tell you my journey to decolonization and how I got there. And I don't know what your perspectives are that you need to rethink. I don't know what you are, working with or considering or want to put that decolonial lens on so that you can have a different perspective. But I'll be talking from my journey as a tech girl and how I see technology requiring more of a decolonial lens in terms of embracing more diversity. And so I thought this isn't necessarily a paradigm. I guess I can call it a paradigm. Decolonization it's not necessarily one that I have worked with, but I have worked with some other what I consider similar theories or methodologies or paradigms. And I thought, well, this is a chance for me to dig deeper into the concept of decolonization. And why not? I mean, I'm always eager to, learn and figure out how well to work with it. But as a first step, I thought, let me go back to my thesis because I think I felt that there were bits and pieces of theories that I used there that might actually inform today's talk. And actually, I was right. But in reading my thesis, I was actually quite surprised. I don't know if you all experienced this. When you suddenly realize it's been 13 years since I defended, it's been that long, and you look at some parts of your work and you wish, oh, I wish I could have a do-over. Do you ever do that when you look at some of your previous work and you wish you could have a do-over? Yeah, that's how I felt as I read the parts that I wanted to use this evening. And in any case, the whole concept of a do-over feels a little to me like the decolonization paradigm. How do we do things over? I have some slides, and my understanding is that Juan will be sharing the slides. So could we have the first slide, please? Yes, that's our title. And then I'll tell you a little bit about myself. So next slide. Yes. Before I look at the concept of decolonization as a do-over, maybe you've read my short bio, I hope, or not, but I have a background in a field or a discipline called science, technology, and society. That's a fancy way of saying social studies of science and technology. And I follow the stream of gender and technology within the discipline. I have specifically worked with feminist technology studies in trying to understand the mutual construction of gender and technology. Eesh, what does that mean? Well, how does technology impact gender? How does gender impact technology? Essentially, the two are mutually, constitutive. And so this is a topic that I often engage in my research and publications. Yeah, the mutual shaping of gender and technology. And this interest comes from growing up and liking to tinker with machines and figure out how they work. Because I had a really fantastic job after my undergraduate, where I trained in finance, yes. And in the job that I was doing, I thought that, educating myself as a computer technician would be useful. It would help me do my job better because I was working with internet access and all those things. And we were selling computers, we were selling modems and all of that. And this is in the 90s. Whereby you could buy different bits of everything and build a computer yourself. And yes, I could do that. But I also realized I was kind of an anomaly because this was a very male-dominated space. And my very presence in this space tended to make society and those around me a little bit uncomfortable. I'm skipping a lot of learning and growth, but fast forward to 2004, when I was happened upon a course called Science, Technology and Society, offered at Linköping University, with an elective in gender and technology, and I thought, finally, maybe this will give me the answers to why there's so few women in tech, and why does that seem to, make society uncomfortable. And as I was introduced to STS, to Science, Technology and Society, and the technology aspect in my gender and technology journey was focused on, of course, IT, information technologies. And I was looking at, for example, trying to understand where are the women, why are there so few, and so forth. In this process, I was introduced to the notion of post-colonial techno-science. Wow, that was such a mouthful for me back in the day. And first of all, I tried to understand what techno-science meant, which is the mutual shaping and influence of technology and science. These two are deeply intertwined. And while it wasn't central to my research, it was still interesting. Now, the post-colonial aspect really triggered me, and I was like, how is techno-science post-colonial? How does post-coloniality impact techno-science? And so I started looking through and trying to understand how do these two go together. Next slide, please, Juan. And the first person who introduced me to post-colonialism was Edward Said. Some of you probably know him. And the book Orientalism was one of those aha moments for me, whereby he essentially looks at how the West historically has viewed or represented the East, specifically the Middle East and Asia. And he looks at Western scholarship, literature, and the way that the East is culturally represented as is often biased and essentialized, and the Orient, or the people from the East, are often put into a specific box. He argued that the notion of Orientalism, the Oriental, it's not just about an academic discipline, but it's a way of actually defining. And when you define something, you tend to sort of other that aspect. And in that definition, there were power imbalances that were being created, as well as domination. So this was quite the the revelation to me. As I read him, I also was introduced to what are called subaltern studies. And the first person I read, next slide please, was Gayatri Spivak, specifically her essay that asks if can the subaltern speak. With the subaltern speak, she really looks at the marginalized voices, those voices that are silenced, specifically in historical narratives. How do you make sure that there's the totality of the story being told in ensuring that not everybody is left out? And so her essay was also another eye-opener where I was trying to understand, so post-colonialism, subalternism, what does that all mean? You know, you're silencing the marginalized because of dominant narratives and power structures, etc. So the subaltern aspect was also super interesting. And the next slide, please. If I tried to see what or how they speak to each other, and in my digging into these theories, I realized that the subaltern studies came first. They emerged out of, you know, an inquiry into the historical narratives that were being written about South Asia. And they were so focused mainly on the silenced voices, on the marginalized voices, whereas the post-colonial arguments took on a more global perspective to see, for example, how can we better understand the colonial imprints and the impact and the influence, and not just on the marginalized communities. Next slide, please. Since this is the KTH Africa days, you might ask, are there any African post-colonial scholars? Yes. I read Chinua Achebe's Things Fall Apart during my high school. It was one of those literature books that we had to do, like Macbeth, Shakespeare, and whatnot. I didn't know that it was a post-colonial or literary critique, but now I do. And in Things Fall Apart, Chinua Achebe is a Nigerian literary scholar who has really, through his protagonist Okonkwo, really looks at the imprint or the impact of the colonial, entry into the Igbo society, and how this has an impact on traditions and societal structures, as well as how, indigenous cultures suddenly go through some sort of change. So Chinua Achebe is an interesting, the book is fictional, but the tenets that you take out of that definitely speak to how basic structures or cultural structures and so forth fall apart when new influences come in through the colonial powers. There are others like Wole Soyinka, who is also from Nigeria. I have Bessie Head, I think from South Africa, Achille Mbembe from Cameroon, and Ngugi wa Thiong'o from Kenya. They've written all fictional books and critique essays that you should definitely have a look at. But since it's the KTH Africa days, I thought you might want to know if there are African scholars there too. Next slide, please. As I mentioned earlier, I'm in IT, I like technology and whatnot, and I coupled that with gender. And so as I was looking at the post-colonial technoscience arguments and so forth, I started also trying to figure out how ICT can benefit from a post-colonial lens. And the notion of the digital divide, for example, helps us to better understand how, especially if you look at the digital divide through a post-colonial lens, you're able to understand why some communities may not necessarily have infrastructure because of how these societies were impacted by the colonial divisions that were created in these communities or these countries. So the digital divide would be an interesting way to better understand the distribution of resources and why some things are the way they are. How post-colonial studies can better support decolonizing the digital space as well. To what extent can marginal voices or the global south contribute to the innovative journey or growth of these digital spaces. We wrote an anthology with some colleagues, and one of them looked at, for example, how it's so difficult for apps that are developed from the global south to receive the same level of recognition, if you may, on Google Store or App Store. So they tend to sort of remain silenced. And so this is an interesting aspect. And then also the extent to which colonial legacies, in linking to that point I just made on about apps that come from the global south, the extent to which colonial legacies have to do with localized innovation ecosystems. How can we support more innovative, solutions coming out from the very communities that need them? Many of them tend to look outside, and this isn't by, chance. It's something that has been ingrained in their very DNA. Next slide, please. And so fast forward, as you heard, I'm working with SPIDER, which stands for the Swedish Program for ICT in Developing Regions, which means we work with technologies that can potentially work or transform societies or contribute to development. And in looking at decolonization and so forth, there's yet another stream of scholarship, I think, that was interesting for me to mention here, and that is post-development studies. Because I was introduced to post-development studies by looking at, for example, how are we doing development? How you do development, does it actually benefit the supposed key actors or communities that you are trying to reach? And this book by Dambisa Moyo is kind of a critique towards development, and so I put it there as a possible reference to post-development studies because it challenges mainstream development and tries to look at, for example, are there other ways? Could we, for example, in doing development, try and work with the communities that are supposed to benefit from what we're doing? How do we decolonize our models and how we work with the notion of development? And this, I think, is something that was critical. Some notable scholars there. Yes, you can move on. Notable scholars there that I've mentioned in passing today. You have Edward Said, who first introduced me to post-colonial studies. Homi Baba is another one. Gayatri Spivak from the subaltern angle. Chandra Mohanty is also another post-colonial scholar. Her essay on Under Western Eyes was another really, really brilliant piece. Bessie Head from South Africa, Chinua Achebe from Nigeria, and Dambisa Moyo, I think she's from Zambia. And then Arturo Escobar, who is Colombian, is also a post-development scholar that I find really interesting, especially as I'm tracing my path to decolonization. So this is how I've made my way here. Okay, next slide, please. So if we try to trace the paths to decolonization, I started with post-colonial studies, but really the journey starts with understanding subaltern studies that actually had a hand in, contributing to the development of post-colonial studies. Subaltern studies looked at marginal voices to try and better understand histories that came from dominant narratives. To what extent were they representative? Where is the agency? Where is the resistance and the voices of the subaltern? Those are questions that subaltern studies ask. And then post-colonial studies kind of built on this, but went further into unpacking and looking at experiences of societies or communities that have been colonized in terms of unpacking the power dynamics. I didn't really delve into neocolonialism, but this stream of studies also looks at how colonial legacies persist even today in terms of impacting economic participation, political and cultural dominance. So neocolonialism is another stream that would be of interest. And then post-development studies, in line with the work that I do, how should development as an industry evolve to ensure that inclusivity when it comes to, solutions that are driven from somewhere else. We need to ensure that they are more inclusive. And then if we're looking at decolonization, this is a framework that is focused on, trying to understand and critique the impact of colonialism. It's kind of emerged in response to ongoing struggles for cultural reclaiming our cultures, social justice, and essentially trying to see and pursue movements that try to dismantle colonial legacies and put more emphasis on non-Western perspectives, non-Western innovations, non-Western ideals, and so forth. If I try to, because I only have 20 minutes, if I try to, wrap this up, next slide, please. I would try and see how decolonialism can have an impact on, or should be seen to have more impact on women in tech. So this is my perspective. This is how I want us to look at decolonization as a way to engage with more women in tech. There's a need to certainly see that inequalities continue to persist when it comes to innovation ecosystems, and work environment structures need to be more equitable. I will go so far as to say that the future of innovation, and in brackets tech, is intersectional. So the notion of intersectionality means that we're all more than what we see. There's the aspect of class, there's gender, there's age, there's race, there's education, etc. There's so many axes of power that have and that intersect to create unique experiences for each and every one of us. So if you're looking at the future of innovation or the innovation economy, that future is intersectional. Community engagement is critical if you want to decolonize these spaces, empower more women and girls, especially those coming from underrepresented communities. That means that in a future where digital is definitely going to be at the forefront of our everyday, we saw that during the pandemic, if we are to contribute to our digital futures, everybody needs to be able to be part of the innovation process and not just receive whatever solutions have been developed elsewhere. And to do that, the environments in which these innovations are taking place have to be inclusive and respective of diverse backgrounds. The recruitment and retainment practices should also be non-biased. There are lots of platforms and apps that can actually support this process. And then, of course, the STEM movement needs more investments in order to enable the process of decolonizing the notion of innovation so that we have more inclusive aspects. I hope that was something like what you were hoping to hear. But I'll hand the floor over to my colleague Juan, who will take you through his journey to decolonization from a completely different perspective. Thank you.
Thank you, Caroline, for your brilliant presentation. I'm very happy to be here with you, sharing this space. I'm going to share with you my perspective on gender as a way for decolonizing science. My name is Juan Camilo Betancourt. I am environmental scientist based in Colombia, and I work for the Sustainable Transitions team at the SEI Center for Latin America. I've been working there since 2021, and I studied intersections between gender, environment, and development. In this sense, I come from a background of environmental science, environmental studies, and since I was studying, I had lots of questions about gender studies and how gender affects all dimensions of our lives. So that questions led to me trying to reconcile those spaces. And some of the knowledge areas that have influenced me the most are feminist geography, feminist theory, and queer theory. Those fields have helped me a lot on trying to see the relationship between environment and the human body, and how um, some starting point for this is that I see gender as a way of socially constructing the bodies. How do we as a society um, make roles for people to occupy? So, on modern societies, on Occidental societies, one way to do this, to construct gender, has been using the sexual difference. So our societies have tended to construct bodies using some sexual characteristics of the body. Queer theory tells us that that should not be the unique category to subdivide gender. That it's way more complicated than that. So first, I want to tell you how I came across decolonization. I came across decolonization when studying environmental history and political ecology, and one of the authors that influenced this stage on me has been Arturo Escobar, that mentioned Caroline. But also, one leading question was how some landscapes and ecosystems have been transformed or replaced with certain crops. So the image I'm showing you here is one sugarcane plantation. Those are very common in some parts of Colombia, and I was wondering how did we get from tropical dry forests to these ginormous plantations that they are monocrops, they are plantations that are there solely for economical production. So I was wondering about the origins of sugarcane on these landscapes, and what I found out is that they are linked to the Spaniards' colonization. That they were there originally for brewing rum and other high calorie food, but also I started wondering about the people that did that work, who often were rationalized people with uh, hard economical hardship, and that were exploited for doing that work. Also, another situation that led me to think about decolonization is the study of culture as an adaptation feature to the environment. So here we have some palaphytic buildings. They are specially adapted to living alongside water and alongside rivers, and they have been the product of decades, if not hundreds of years, of adaptation of people to their surroundings. So they are part of amphibian cultures, and they are the expression of people's uh, communication, people's adaptation to their environment. So when the colonization started in many parts of America and other parts of the world, the culture and those adaptations of people to their environment were erased, were substituted with other types of buildings that are not sensitive to the environment changes or to the environmental features. And then those adaptation processes were disrupted, increasing the susceptibility of people to disasters, in this case, inundations and other types of risks associated with water. But this is just one example of how adaptation to the places people inhabit were disrupted by colonization. And the last issue from a very geographical point of view that I came across decolonization. Um, well, first, how Mercator projection distorted the size of the countries, and mainly the North countries or the rich countries, but also how north on the maps is just an arbitrary question and doesn't need to be on top of the maps. That also is linked with the power of those geographical potencies. But then I came across some geographer called Enrique Dussel, who makes the point of America not being an occidental continent, but rather an oriental continent. This is related to the history of population of America through the Bering Strait, but also from the Polynesia. This helps us uh, move forward, thinking that the Mediterranean Sea is at the center of the world, such, an, such as this map shows, but also to value how the Pacific Ocean has been central to the cultures of the Asian Pacific, and also to reconsider the origins of the native people of the Americas, to see them as the extreme Orient to the Orient, in his words. So, um, how did this influence my work? This sparked a lot of questions. Among them, which representations of the environment occur in a context, which gender representations or roles its society have, which notions of development exist in it, and what are the conditions that allow these discourses to exist. So these are some efforts of critical discourse analysis for trying to figure out how these pieces fit on the puzzle and how do in on the grand scheme environment, gender, and development coexist and how they are related to colonization. So, one big affirmation that I can abstract from those questions is that patriarchy is often present in colonization processes and manifests, among others, in the male ethos, characterized by domination attitudes and the prioritization of productive work over reproductive or care work. To illustrate this, I want to tell you the story of them. They are part of one process that occurred in Colombia called the Antioqueño colonization. They were displaced people by a war, and they are part of what some have called the Antioqueño cultural complex. So they, due to the war, displaced to other parts of the country, uh, getting with them their cultural elements. I'm gonna explain this picture to you in a moment. In the meantime, I want to show you this map. The orange section is the part that they were originally from, but they spread throughout the south, conforming what is nowadays the Colombian coffee region. Um, so they are marked. They are a cultural complex which is marked by a patriarchal social organization with a high religious tint and conservatism. They often valued productivity more than care and reproductive work. This is a parallel with the Spaniards' colonization, which tried to spread the Catholicism and other of their cultural traits throughout the world. But also, they uh, have the trait of the primacy of economy over all other aspects. So here we can evidence some economistic views of development, and also their diets gravitated around maize, beans, and plantain, which became central to the culture, and then well they spread those elements throughout the surface of Colombia. Um, Catholicism for them was a collective identity trait. Um, some has some one anthropologist from Colombia, Virginia Gutierrez de Pineda, uh, wrote that an individual that is not on the true religious cultural path cannot be considered as a desirable member of society, which communes with great certainty of this faith and does not conceive another. So this is one reflection on the importance of the Catholic tradition for these people. Also, they have a group. They have a division of labor based on sex, in which the women are confined to the reproductive dimensions and the private spaces. They often uh, carried out tasks relating the care of children, the care of the elder, the home, etc. And they often carry out these tasks on the private spaces, on their homes, while men often went out of the homes, tried to uh, occupy themselves with work that produced money, while women occupied of those tasks that support life in general and that support the economic system as a whole. Also, they had an asymmetric distribution of land, money, and productive activities, and the families follow a patriarchal social structure. Also, they often are kind of male chauvinistic. They have a masculine ethos with authoritarian, dominant, and aggressive traits that expressed not only on the territory or the social relations. When I say expressed on the territory, I want to remind you that mono- monoculture I showed you before, which was oriented just to produce money. This is what some have called a biopolitics of domination, the impulse to dominate life towards the purposes of 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 those who are directing them. In this case, money and economic power. Finally, before I go back to the picture I showed before, uh, the the coloniality of this process reflects also in perceiving the other as an antagonist. The other for them were those considered atheists, lazy, liberals, and non-white. So the land they started occupying was not empty. There were indigenous people living there. There were black people living there that liberated themselves from slavery, and they were perceived as non-desirable people for the community. So they were often marginalized, as well as people who uh, mm, deviated from the traditional gender roles. So, for example, for being an accepted man, you should be the hegemonic man, the dominant, aggressive, strong man, capable of deforesting one here by himself. Also, the identity was constructed by negating the other, so they were very religious in contraposition to atheists. They were laborious people, or projected themselves as laborious, focused in hard work. They were very conservative and they projected themselves as a white society exclusively. Also, they tried to disseminate those cultural traits by force on the territory. So going back to them, this is a very famous painting colonization process. This is the head of the family. This painting is called Horizons, and he is showing the horizon for his family. He goes at the front. He shows which is the way to follow, where to go, and what to do, while the women on this society were relegated to follow the path that men. That is not saying that is something that is desirable, but that were the social standards and the social roles enforced by society. So she was occupied with the care of the children, of the family, but also, if you look here, they are carrying coffee, which became synonymous with prosperity for them. This meant development, and to establish the coffee, If you look at the hand of this man, you will find an axe. That axe is the tool that helped them transform and um, the territories, the forest, diverse landscape they had into plains in which they will be able to plant coffee and other crops. So this is a domination of the territory. But as I'm speaking to you, not only the territory has been exploited, but also the domestic and care work of women. All that social, all that economic apparatus was also sustained on the care work of women, which had been exploited for decades. And I have some key messages for you resulting from this story I told you quickly. First, that gender is an essential ingredient for decolonizing research. There will be no decolonization without gender equality. And if we do not apply gender lens to our decolonization research, we will miss out on lots of information and lots of social processes that are relevant for fully decolonizing the world. Second, that gender oppression is a form of colonization of the bodies as well. The bodies often are subjected to social standards that are enforced on the cost of marginalization. If you do not follow them, you are at risk of being marginalized and deprived from uh, the basic minimum for your well-being. And also that challenging societal prescriptions about gender is a way for decolonization through the liberation of the bodies. We have many tools for liberating our bodies from the traditional gender roles that have been imposed to us. Uh, some of the most outstanding and important are feminisms and gender and queer studies. They have permeated most, if not all, knowledge areas, and they have shown us how important are their analyses in in all in all our work. So thank you for being here with us and for listening me. I hope you have uh, I hope I have motivated and sparked some thoughts on you, and uh, I will be happy to hear some questions and thoughts of you. Thank you.
Thank you, Caroline, and thank you, Juan, for really enlightening presentations and for sharing your personal stories. I really like that way of sharing a kind of complex concept with a roots and history in different traditions. Thank you. I have questions, but first I want you to have questions. So and also we have some audience online. Is that correct? Yeah. Do we have any questions from the online audience to start with? Nope, not yet. No, you just chat to them and ask them to ask questions. So please, who would like to start? Do we have any questions or reflections? You don't have to ask questions. Yes.
Okay. Thank you so much for your talk. My name is Zoreen. I'm an anthropologist, so a lot of the names were familiar.
Closer to your mouth.
Closer to my mouth.
Yes.
Thank you. I wanted to ask, essentially, how do you work with the criticism that decolonization, particularly in tech and business and entrepreneurship, often gets reduced to diversity and inclusion and equity measures, which only scratches the surface and often doesn't address things like labor and extraction. Yeah.
Do you want me to answer straight away? Okay. That's a very good question. And it shows that this is a framework that has only gained prominence now in the 20th century. It is undergoing various, revisions and, to improve and work better with it. The fact that there's a focus on more diversity and not focusing on some of the aspects, like, for example, that Juan mentioned, is definitely a critique. If you look at all the some of the theories that I mentioned, they also have their critiques, and this is a definite critique for decolonization. How should I work with that? I think it's an ongoing process, not forgetting, for example, that while you're focusing on diversity, let's not forget about care work. While we're focusing on this, let's not forget about the fact that certain aspects of who the person is are being silenced at the same time. So this is ongoing work, and it's very resource intensive. This is something I think we all need to be aware of. And I don't really have an answer, but the point is that being aware, knowing that this is one of the criticism of this particular notion. I don't know if Juan has any thoughts.
Not at the moment.
Okay.
Great. Thank you. Anyone else?
I wish to have your point of view with respect to what she mentioned, inclusion, diversity, and what's the other one? And equity. Do you think those three themes can really lead to decolonization?
Another good question.
Would you like to try to answer?
If one works with diversity, equity, and inclusion, will that lead to decolonization? I don't know. I would hazard a no. I don't think so. I think we have a lot more work to do because, as I said, the complexities of what it is that tends to leave out some communities or some bodies, as Juan said, go beyond just diversity, equity, and inclusion. There's so much more to unravel. And as we grapple with the concept of decolonization, I think we'll continue to learn as we go along. So, I don't know. I'm on the fence, but probably not.
Thank you. John, would you like to add something here?
Yeah, I think we would also be missing the reparation. I think the colonization has had some impacts that urge to be repaired. And also one key aspect is that those oppression systems need to be dismantled. If we are all equal and included into a system of oppression, that doesn't mean it isn't there. Because the oppression is not only, as I wanted to convey in my presentation, towards the human bodies, but also the rest of the territories we inhabit.
Great. Thank you. Would someone like to add something to? Yeah. We have an online question or reflection.
Great. So there's a question to Juan, and it is from Fred Larsen, and he's asking, say, of course, your presentation varies for countries, but other way, he's asking, was there gender equality before colonialization? Or maybe you may want to clarify what kind of colonialization is yeah.
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's a very important subject for history. Decolonial feminists have a lot of work on that, but in reality, we lack historical sources. What it's known is that previous to the colonization, European colonization of America and other continents such as Africa, there wasn't necessarily a binary system of gender. And I can't say that there was gender equality, but I know that the system was very different and was not based on sexual characteristics necessarily, and it wasn't binary also. That was a system that was installed after the European colonization, and that is the main productor of inequalities nowadays. Does that answer your question? I don't know if Caroline wants to complement my answer.
I would say exactly what you just said in terms of if I were to think of a community in Africa, and that's very, I know saying the word Africa, it's such a diverse continent. We have the history that is written, and that's why I talked about the notion of the subaltern. Which are the voices that have been silenced? Where is the history that hasn't been written? And some of the history that we read or know about our countries or communities has come from, the colonial legacies, and it might not necessarily represent exactly what existed. From an African perspective, it was such an oral society that having written history to reference is it makes it difficult to answer this question: were we equal before colonialism? Maybe, I don't know. But again, the history we read says otherwise. And who wrote that? Then we need to think about those voices that have been silenced or are not included.
Hi, my name is Faith. I have maybe a controversial question, so to speak. So decolonization is a concept of changing mindsets, and when we refer to decolonization, we're changing mindsets of the global south, let me refer to as that. Is there a way we can open a space or an environment where we're also trying to change the mindsets of the people in the global north so that they don't see themselves as the reference point? Thank you.
Is there a way? Oi. I think this is an ongoing, this is work in progress. I'm not sure how to do that, but I do know that, for example, when you have an African last name as an academic scholar, you struggle to publish in certain spaces. And that doesn't go away even if you're in a European university. This is an experience that I have had. How do we decolonize that? I honestly don't know, because I have written pieces that I knew could speak to mainstream, audiences. And because of my last name or the community I referenced coming from Uganda, I was told maybe this belongs in a development journal. And that direction tends to also mean that we're kind of talking in an echo chamber. We're talking to each other. It doesn't really filter. And I honestly don't know how to answer, how do we try and change the mindset, because this is an ongoing struggle even today with academics. And I'm speaking from that perspective. It's, I don't know. Juan? I don't know.
It is a really difficult question. I don't think an answer exists. What I want to say is it's that it's important to also add context to the question, and it's not only about mindsets but also power. It's a question about power. What is the power that sustains the colonial powers today? Those are also questions that need to be included alongside your question in order to be complete, because if it's not only about mindset, I mean, there are also the economic power, the economic system. Many of the colonial powers are today's warmongers, and also have military power. So there's a lot of layers to that, and it's impossible to answer um, easily.
Yeah.
Is it on? Good evening. My name is John Black. I am also from Uganda, from as Caroline, and I'm actually her postdoc fellow. I wanted to reflect, and maybe a question will come from this, but I wanted to think about the affirmative action. I don't know if you know, this happened maybe 20 years ago around increasing girl child education. At least in Uganda, this happened. And it basically means that society had to not let things go as they are flowing, like to really interrupt the flow actively, and not just say this is how it is easy, it is how we've been doing it, we're just going to go with it. I actually like to think about it from a physics perspective. I think it is Newton's first law of motion that a body will continue at rest or in its state of motion unless some external force happens to it. And this external force is the affirmative action. Someone has to wake up and say, we cannot allow things to continue the way they're happening. Now, the question is, do people have enough motivation to apply this force? And if you look at it from, for example, the climate crisis we are facing, there are people who just continue to do things the way they're happening or the easy way. And now there is more and more evidence to say if you continue like that, it is detrimental for you and also for the rest. So you should act. So maybe the question now is, how do we show to the reference groups that if you continue working like that as the reference point, it is detrimental for you as well as for the rest that is being underrepresented and being marginalized. And maybe that's what we need to do. We need to find evidence, and we need to show that if you don't encourage diversity, this is the loss you make, not only for you. And I think, for example, the agenda of KTH in Africa, where we're talking about learning from each other and capacity building and seeing how we can benefit, how KTH can benefit. When I came for this day, or when I had this agenda, I was thinking, why? Why is KTH coming to Africa? What are they looking for? Because there has to be something for them. And that is the thing that we need to find. And maybe now we can begin to think about that. Because if we're going to change anything, decolonization, human rights, climate, we have to sort of just satisfy each individual's selfish interests. And hopefully that then they can see that their interests also, fulfilling the interests needs that they fulfill the interests of the others. That is sort of like the rambling that I'm going on, but I hope you get the idea, because I come from these sort of movements that have been happening, and I think we can learn from that.
Thank you. Thank you. Would you like to comment, Joan and Caroline?
Not really.
Yeah, I think.
But maybe Juan does.
Yes.
Yeah, I think that also some days ago I saw a poster that spoke directly to me, and it said like another world already exists. So we are always trying to create a new world that for dismantling those systems of oppression, but also those elements are around us, and maybe we are not aware of that. So joining forces and cooperation between South countries, it's really important in that sense. I think at least in America, the Latin American countries do not cooperate so much as one would think, because we share land and many other relations, but in other senses they do not cooperate. I think we can start cooperating a lot more and being aware of the processes that we need to thrive as a society that tries to break with that colonial relationship and that top-bottom relation we often have with developed countries or not, or North countries, or however. you want to call them.
Hi, my name is Ruth Brenva, and I've done my PhD here in that same topic. I wish I had you as a co-supervisor. I struggled with Spivak a lot. But nevertheless, I think when I looked at social innovation entrepreneurship in emerging markets, and in particular in Africa, I did a longitudinal study there. I started to use the post-colonial lens as, I saw that actually constituted a challenge, especially as I followed and studied foreign-born entrepreneurs approaching local markets. And to the point, how do you decolonize? I think one approach, as I try to dive into this question, what does it mean when you come with a northern perspective into things? It's manifest as bias and racism. And how do we, as human beings, how do we get rid of our bias? One approach is that we have to get to know each other. Then we start to make exceptions. Oh, you look like that. I know the rest are like this. But you seem nice. You're an exception to the rule. And then we add on, we reframe the mental models. And so I look partly at neuroscience. How does that happen? And if we think about how to change the colonial perspective on North, when I did my research, I started in 2013 and ended a few years later, I tried to find also African scholars to collaborate with. And it was hard. It wasn't that many that were published. And I felt like almost fraud. Who am I to write about what's going on in Kenya and Uganda? I must add that perspective. And it was harder. And now I have refreshed, like you talked about, I have refreshed my research last year. And I could find so many more references. And when I spoke to some entrepreneurs, I did find John Black. I called them 2 weeks ago. And I said, look, they have this fantastic idea in their mind, but I don't trust them because they come from the wrong country. And you tell me what you think. And you did. Which changed my perspective. So I think we're on track. I'm quite positive, especially in the research community and within the field of innovation. I think, what has happened in the past few years, it makes it easier for me, coming from this country, to connect with other scholars internationally. And so I had a kind of another question, which was, here we represented SAY in Colombia, and you are based in Stockholm University. Now, what's the link to KTH researchers? Can you give any examples of, collaboration? Because that's one of my questions. When I've been here, I felt it's quite fragmented. So I was sitting here, I felt quite lonely in there. And then I tried to find other people. So how do you collaborate with KTH as one?
Okay.
Sorry for the very practical question on that note, but how do we continue collaborating? Because I think that can enhance some of these things we talk about.
I can answer that very quickly. Susanne and I, from KTH, supporting John Black through his postdoc. So that's a collaboration between us and KTH. Then we also have an EU-financed project that is coordinated at KTH. It's about, the acronym is Holy Care. It's, you might have heard of it, or you will hear about it. It's, what was that? Yeah, and it's Professor Aman Rusom who's coordinating that project. And so we from Stockholm University, specifically myself and a few other colleagues, we're working we're leading one of the work packages in that project. So we've already established those connections, and we hope that more will come. Juan?
Often my work is done with a lot of colleagues from Latin America. I don't know which example of collaboration to give you, but one of the most recent projects that was a collaboration with let me translate the acronym in my head, the Organization of the Cooperation Treaty for the Amazon. It involved governments from the 8 Amazon countries, and we were working on a baseline for the implementation of the SDGs. So that is the most recent cooperation example I have from my work. But also we have been planning to establish some South-South cooperation with the Colombian government and Brazilian government. We are working on that, so it's not ongoing at this moment, but I hope it starts soon. Yeah, that's it.
Thank you. And thank you, Ruth, for the question. And I think the Africa Days is one way to try to encourage people and share what we are doing at KTH, and also to try to find new collaborators. Great. I think, Anders, you had a question?
Yeah, maybe. I have so many thoughts, so it's difficult to. But connecting to your question there, which was about how can decolonization be used to change the mindsets of Europeans, kind of. I think it's very interesting, and I hope I can say yes. But the challenge there is to first reveal that the European has a mindset, as you say, and that is in particular in engineering and natural sciences, where we have this idea that we are objective, that there are no norms or values or worldviews underlying what we are doing. We are like separated from that. So there I find inspiration from decolonization as a spotlight to put on that and to work with that kind of change. So there is this decolonization of knowledge, for example. We need to change here. We have created a completely unsustainable society, and a technical university is very much contributing to maintaining this unsustainable status quo, and there I see inspiration in decolonization. Do you have any comments or reflections on?
I'm just excited that you're talking to each other and responding to each other's questions and comments, because this is, I think, exactly what Juan and I were hoping for, to see this kind of interactivity. I think I agree with you. Essentially, what you just said, I think, is exactly what we need to keep doing.
Hi, it's me again. I have more of a practical question. So we know that data policies in Africa have just been a mess. And now that we're moving towards data science, data etc., and we're having this EU-AU agenda that's popping up, how can we ensure that as the African data policies are developing, that responsible collaborations and research is taking place in regards to protecting the data that is being produced in these collaborations and so forth?
Africa is sitting on banks and banks of data already. There's already ongoing work that is being done in this space. The point, though, is that much of it hasn't seen the light of day, and that's not through lack of trying. I think much of this work needs to go, even the African mindset needs to be decolonized, to recognize that we have our own science, we have our own understanding of this data. How do we use it to further develop or transform a specific area, be it health or whatever, where the data is being used? But there's a tendency to look at data coming from outside and not necessarily the data that is within. So even the African mind needs to recognize we have the data, we're sitting on banks of it. Let us just use the data that we have here instead of thinking that we can copy and paste what has been done elsewhere and apply it to the context. That's a problem. I think we also have the onus is on us to also do the work, would be my response.
Your comment, is that part of the data? Because we also have an online audience who would like to ask a question. Or?
Sort of a follow-up.
Okay, sure. So we bring in the online question again here. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you. This question is not from online.
Okay.
This is mine. So I kind of wanted to ask about the whole term decolonialization or decolonization. Um, if you followed from Juan's presentation that colonialism really, originated from this patriarchal, male-dominated society. And then you kind of think about it. If I'm coming here for economic purposes, um, I'm coming to, gain something. Uh, if the men or these people from this, the people doing the colonialization, if they had economic how do we call it? You know, their their goals was based on getting something for their own country. Do you think they would intentionally affect the other or their colonist culture in terms of how intentional was this effect we're talking about? For example, he said gender differences came into these new or these colonies from the colonializer or colonizer, let's say. My question is it should it really be called decolonization, given that the main goal for colonizing itself was mostly for some kind of economic purpose, and in fact, it's the side effect of colonization we are trying to address. So, should we even call it decolonization? And if so, how do we then address these side effects that really didn't originate intentionally? That's basically what I want to ask.
Thank you. I think one of the defining features of colonization is the intention to erase culture, to erase memory, to erase the other, and to make it my place. In that sense, I think decolonization tries to break away from those intentions and to steer towards more healthy intercultural relationships. I mean, migration it's not a problem, not even when economic interest it's on the middle. And I think those intercultural relations can happen for the benefit of all cultures that are involved in it. I'm not sure if that answers your question or if I understood it correctly. Please correct me if I'm
wrong. Well, okay. Just basing back on your presentation, these from the paintings you explained, these people were more focused on economic gains, productivity as compared to reproduction and care. So how is affecting someone's culture or kind of contributes to that particular goal? So if it was really perpetrated by these men, then this thing about affecting someone else's culture or bringing in some gender definition should not really be part of colonization. In fact, it might be the side effect. So, is decolonization actually addressing the side effects of colonization, or is it undoing colonization?
I think colonization cannot be undone. I think it can be repaired. I think we can try to bring back the knowledge that has been lost. In the case that I showed about these peasants that colonized other parts of the country, they treated those areas as if they were barren land. They tried to make tabula rasa and to start over again. Like this forest, it's unproductive land, so we do not care about that. Let's replace it with some monoculture. These people are not hardworking. They are not white. They are not religious. They are not useful for us or for our society. Let's get rid of them. That's the colonial mindset they have, and that's why I say they portray an example of colonialism at an internal scale. And related to that, I think that cannot be undone. There has more than a century has passed since that occurred. The ecosystems are already transformed. They are already built into cities. The indigenous people have been affected and have been displaced. The black people as well. And that cannot be undone. That cannot be undone. I think what follows that is that we as a society in Colombia should make a great effort to repair the people and the ecosystems, to try to revalorize their cultures that were erased. Well, they weren't erased at all. They were displaced, but on a practical sense, in those places they were erased and substituted for other kind of society. I mean, clocks cannot go backward, so the only thing, as with other problems, is to try to restore, to repair, to try to solve the mess they created.
Thank you so much for all the questions that you have. And as Caroline said, we are very happy that you had so many questions and reflections. And we actually have already gone over time. I thought it was at 7 o'clock. I guess it was just me who just wished for. So I would like to have the final question. I know that you raised your hand. And so let your question be the last. So and then we can also stay here. We can have more of the food, I think, and drinks. And chat.
Okay, I'll try to do this quickly. My name is Nicholas Honnet. I'm from the Department of Electric Power and Energy Systems here. So I'm one of those engineers who think that all of my thinking is very objective and maintained by or determined by equations and things. But so a follow up on the question about data. It struck me that decolonization and digitalization, there must be quite a tug of war there with homegrown technologies, homegrown skills, local data, control of data, things like that. And for instance, one example that I thought of now is a Silicon Valley company that's offering electronic identity services through biometric scanning of people in countries far away from where they have their offices and databases and server halls. My question is your views on this tug of war. Do I interpret that correctly? And is there a good place to start reading up on these things if one is interested? So to both speakers, and then also just say thank you for a very important discussion and for your personal sharing your personal ideas and journeys on this. Thanks.
Yeah, this tug of war, when you're working with digitalization in terms of supporting social transformation, development, growth in whatever sector, to what extent are you reinforcing what took place or continues to take place in many of these communities? It's an ongoing, there's that tension that is ongoing. And the way we work, I work with, or we work with this concept is on a needs-based. We try to understand, for example, what are the needs of the community and what resources are available to them. It's not always a solution that is from elsewhere that will best fit that community. You always have to find out, for example, what resources are available. Maybe radio is still the best technology for X community, and not necessarily some app that has been developed elsewhere, because hey, the radio is still one of the most accessible forms of communication technologies. So we always work from a needs-based perspective, try to understand, and then we also ensure that we work with researchers from the contexts who can go into the communities and understand what is it you want out of this initiative. How do we make sure that it is locally anchored in your growth development plans, and ensure that it's not something that is being imposed on them, but it actually grows from the specific ways in which they see, I don't know, the future, the development and so forth of their society. So that's one where we try to flip, the whole, and work with the concept of post-development, as I mentioned earlier, because digitalization can be tricky. And if we're to do it right and make sure that it's sustainable, it really needs to grow from the needs of the communities, would be my response.
My name is Regina Irunde from Tanzania. I met Caroline in Tanzania, and I wanted to ask her a simple question. Like you met maybe when you are on your process of working with community in Tanzania, Rwanda, you have been for collaboration with those people. You met several challenges. Which is the most challenge which you think something can be done to make it better in the future? And what can be done to reduce the gap between your uncomfortable to be a woman in sciences? Sometimes it is uncomfortable. Myself, I tried a little bit when I was doing my PhD. So we go into the community, in interior villages, maybe to collect water sample when you are doing water quality analysis. But when I go there, I'm supposed to be a woman. You should be a chemist and a woman. Like I should not go there wearing a trouser. I should, even if I'm going to collect water samples in the well and whatever, I am supposed to wear a dress, so to be comfortable, like the community to take me like a. I don't know how. Can you explain it?
Now we should have coffee and discuss this in detail, but the short answer to that experience is that if you want to get access to the community, you definitely have to try your level best to, what was it that Giddens said? Was it Giddens or I don't remember, go native? No, I forget. Some sociologist, he said something along the lines of to be able to get access and to be able to, fit in, you have to adjust. And if trousers will make people uncomfortable and not get you the samples that you need, then don't wear them. You need access, you need to be able to do the science, to take back the knowledge and transform that community. So let's do what we need to do to be able to get the results that we need and really contribute to changing whatever it is, the situation that you want to change. Challenges that have been experienced in our bilateral research cooperation with Rwanda, Tanzania, Uganda, Cambodia, so forth. I'm trying to. I've seen a lot of positivity. I mean, lots of growth, and you go back and people have assumed such critical and important positions, and they're really making differences in their community. And I think the challenge that I have seen that perhaps needs to change is there's too much focus on teaching in universities, in the universities we've been privileged to work on. There's very little investment or resource, and I understand why that is, because teaching is where the financial resources come in that really support the institution. But research requires just as much investment, and we need to do more of that in many of these universities. So I think for me that's a big challenge, whereby there's not enough time allocated for scholars to actually do actual research and publish and just really bring out the knowledge to a scientific level. We need more of that, and for me, I think that's the biggest challenge. I would like to see more research, publishing and that sort of work, which is critical to the growth of the scientific knowledge in many of the universities that we've been working in.
And also, John, would you like to say something short in the end here? Because now we have really gone over the time. Before we close. No, John? No, he doesn't hear me, maybe. Maybe that's good. Maybe we take that as a sign that we can now finalize this seminar. And I would really like to say a big thank you. Caroline. And John, and I think you get an applaud here, right? It's been really enlightening, and I really, my question, no, I shouldn't ask it, but we can discuss it,
yes.
Because I really need to learn, more in practice how we can do this, how we can be part of this movement, how we can also change our minds. So thank you, everyone. I just want to mention by the end here that at KTH we are, as part of us trying to find more collaborations, starting a KTH alumni or Africa alumni or community, where we will have this is kind of the first event or days as part of that, but we would like to collaborate more with people who are interested in researching and education, etc., together with Africa. So welcome. We will see more of that. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.